Happy Friday Breakfast Club, Sketchy here. So this week we've talked about drugs, both legalization and even criminalization of drugs that are already legal like alcohol and tobacco. This boils down to a single philosophy, prohibitionism. Prohibitionism is the idea that if you make something illegal, people simply stop doing it. Fortunately, in the US, we have a historical precedent for that, namely the 18th Amendment of the US Constitution, otherwise known as the Prohibition of Alcohol. Ratified federally in 1920, the prohibition of alcohol was primarily pushed and supported by feminist groups like the women's temperance movement, by conservative groups like Wesleyan churches, and by the Knights of the Ku Klux Klan. Yeah, feminists and the Klan working together, that happened. The objectives of the prohibitionist movement were threefold. First, reduce crime and poverty. Second, reduce the burden on the taxpayer by reducing the burden on the penal system. And third, improve health, especially related to the liver. Now, in the first case, crime and poverty did exactly the opposite. Organized crime sprung up, and a burgeoning black market. You have some of the most infamous crime syndicates in world history. Figures like Al Capone cropped up to fill the gap. So obviously, as a result, you have this giant spike in crime, both in violent crime and in non-violent crime, where you've criminalized a group of people for doing what they were doing before, regardless of whether they hurt anybody or not. That obviously increased spending substantially in both terms of the prison system and in terms of enforcement. In fact, that went up something like eightfold depending on which numbers you're looking at. In terms of health benefits, well, about 1.5% of people were actually dying from liver-related issues in the 20s. After Prohibition, well, 1.5. Yeah. In fact, it actually got a little bit worse. You see, you can get cirrhosis whether or not you drink. It's an unfortunate fact of life. It does increase your chances, but only about 4% of hardcore drinkers actually wind up with cirrhosis. So if this policy was successful, you would expect at least the median age of people dying from liver-related problems would go up somewhat. They would be older people dying from these problems. The exact opposite was the case, and it actually went down by 6 months. I would primarily attribute this to the fact that alcohol became a black market commodity and therefore unregulated. So you have things like spoiled stock, you have things like poisonous bathtub gin, or moonshine so strong that it hit you like a ton of bricks. The 18th Amendment was eventually repealed. In fact, it's the only US constitutional amendment to be repealed in its entirety in 1933 in the form of the 21st Amendment. Unfortunately, we didn't learn our lesson there, and this puritanical attitude towards mind-altering substances continued. The first group attacked were Mexican migrant workers who had a fondness for this plant, this strange weed that grew called marijuana. Since there's nothing particularly scary about this harmless weed, propaganda had to be invented. The most infamous of which, reefer madness. I mean, obviously it's complete propaganda horseshit. There's no bearing whatsoever on reality. But it worked. The effect was the American population was terrified by this new drug that would make you go crazy and kill everybody. And so the war on drugs persisted, escalated further in the 80s by Reagan, and then with Bush Sr. and the Iran-Contra scandal, which is a rather ugly affair in US history. We still haven't eliminated drugs. We spend exorbitant amount of money trying to do so. Lives are lost, money is thrown away, our prison system overflows. What do we have to show for all of it? Now, to qualify this little speech, I did some illicit drugs when I was younger. In fact, I did a lot. But I've been clean and sober for a long time. In fact, I barely drink at all, and that's perfectly legal. My drugs of choice are nicotine and caffeine. That's pretty much it. Yep, I'm boring these days. So, don't think I'm trying to push this ideology or something. No, it's more like, let's look at the facts. I don't really have a stake in the game, but the repercussions for our society have been very fucking negative, and I don't see how that's working out for us. Now, should we go back to a period of like the Chinese opium dens of 2 centuries previous? No, I don't think so. But we needn't false dichotomies if we're actually looking for the right solution to what we perceive as problems. Instead, let's look at all the available facts, first and foremost, history, and see how these things have worked out for different nations, both in the approaches of taking drugs as a health concern and taking it as a criminal concern. Thanks for watching. Have a good one.